The sky above Reloth 9 turned violet as the fireworks burst, a celebration so loud the ground trembled. Varkari soldiers danced in their segmented armor, drunk on fermented Skal blood and certainty. Transmission beacons flashed across the command dome. Terran reinforcements en route. That was all it took. The war was over. Earth had answered. The Sunburner was coming. General Vosh stood atop the crystal balcony, arms raised to the roaring crowd. "They have sent their wrath," he declared. "The most feared weapon in the Orion arm flame incarnate, metal vengeance. Let the enemy look to the stars and despair." His speech was interrupted by more cheers and the crash of ceremonial drums. His junior officers toasted with blackroot wine, already drafting surrender terms for the enemy. But then the shuttle landed. Small, no escorts, no dreadnought shadow. 5 Terrans disembarked, humanoid, scarred, and indifferent. No sunburner, just people. One leaned against the hull, chewing something and squinting at the sky. Another dragged a case marked "Field Tools Non-Regulation" and wore a cracked helmet painted with tally marks. The laughter from the command dome was instant and cruel. "That's it?" Colonel Jov hissed through his 3 jaws, elbowing a fellow officer. "No armor columns? No orbital fire support? Just 5 bipeds? One smoking. Is that tobacco?" Inside the command dome, sarcasm echoed like a chant. "Earth has sent the elite snack division. Look, one of them is sleeping on a crate, clearly lethal. Is this some Terran joke?" The 5 made no ceremony of their arrival. They didn't salute. They didn't announce themselves. They just walked heads low, eyes scanning, like they'd been through this routine on planets no one bothered to name anymore. The one smoking had a limp, old but permanent. The one with the cracked helmet dropped her case, sat on it, and removed a boot to reveal a foot covered in burn scar tissue and duct tape. General Vosh watched in stunned silence as the humans were led to a side compound. "Where are their weapons?" he muttered. "They claim they brought them," said a junior comms officer, flicking through the manifest. "But there's no heavy artillery, no mechs, no atmospheric slicers, nothing registered as high yield, no sunburner." "This can't be," Vosh snapped. "This is an insult. Where is Earth's fire? Where is the planet killer?" From a nearby ridge, a Varkari scout blinked 4 eyes and said softly, "Maybe that is the fire." The first skirmish came 3 days later. Enemy plasma hounds breached Sector 12, expected to be a minor probe. Varkari High Command insisted it was an opportunity for honor and denied the humans even a perimeter post. Colonel Jov strutted into battle formation with 200 gleaming Varkari troopers. The humans sat in silence outside the mess tent. At 4:32, the Varkari formation was overrun. The hounds didn't probe, they blitzed. Stealth fields, anti-armor mandible charges. Sector 12 folded in minutes. Jov's flank disappeared. Screams tore through the comms, followed by static. And then chaos. The 5 humans moved. No request, no coordination, no approval. They ran. The one called Baker sprinted ahead, unshouldering a railgun with half its casing missing and setting up behind a collapsed comm tower. The woman with the cracked helmet, Redmond, ripped open her case, pulled out a coiled net of metallic fibers and vanished toward the front. A third Cortez dragged 2 crates of what looked like waste batteries toward the enemy's projected advance line. Lieutenant Mason, tall and silent, carried a Varkari scout bleeding from his lower carapace and dumped him behind makeshift cover. "He's not dying today," he growled, pressing his belt buckle against the wound to stanch it. The last Andrews walked calmly into the line of fire, with nothing but a multi-tool and a portable relay unit. He crouched behind a ruptured tank, pressed a few buttons, and began muttering to himself as he tapped into enemy frequencies. In 11 minutes, Sector 12 was stabilized. Of the original Varkari formation, 70 were alive, because the humans intervened. Redmond's fiber net fried the targeting systems on 6 plasma hounds. Cortez's battery trap sent a magnetic shock wave that blew 2 hounds into the sky. Mason fought hand to hand against something with 6 legs and acidic spit, and still came out standing, bloodied but breathing. And Andrews, he hijacked the enemy's comm loop and rerouted it back to their own ranks, creating chaos. Half the enemy force turned on each other for 8 critical seconds. Afterward, no one laughed when Redmond limped past the medical station to check on the scout she'd hauled back. She didn't say a word, just checked his pulse, nodded once, and left. General Vosh demanded an audience. "This is insubordination," he thundered. "We did not authorize engagement." Baker leaned back against the dome wall and puffed out a tired breath. Neither did the plasma hounds. "You violated chain of command." Cortez picked a bit of shrapnel from her hair and dropped it into a pouch, without answering. Bosch seethed. "You were not sent to undermine our leadership, you were sent to help," said Mason. His voice was hoarse, low. "We're doing that." "Where is the sun burner?" Bosch demanded. "Why did Earth not send it?" Redmond gave a bitter chuckle and walked away. Andrews looked up from his relay and said flatly, "Because if the sunburner comes, it means you've already lost." The room fell silent. That night, the soldiers shared their rations under a rusted support beam. The air reeked of ozone and ash. Redmond was rewrapping her foot, 4 toes missing on the right, healed long ago but clearly aching in the cold. Mason was quiet, watching the horizon. Baker filed the barrel of his railgun with a toothbrush. Cortez stared into the distance, chewing something that wasn't rations. Andrews, still holding the relay unit, was feeding false coordinates into the enemy's tracking system. "You good?" Mason asked him. Andrews shrugged. "Got a couple ghosts in the signal. They're smart, smarter than last time." "Not smarter than us," said Redmond, voice low. Cortez tilted her head. "You sure? They were using Varkari comm channels for their rear orders. Means they've been listening for weeks." Mason nodded once. "Then we end it fast." No one said anything after that. The next day, scouts spotted a full enemy offensive force mobilizing. Thousands. Not a probe, not a raid, a full push. The Rakari High Command entered panic mode, and the 5 humans began preparing like they'd seen it before. Because they had. The storm hit before the Varkari finished redrawing the battle map. At 900, enemy advance elements broke through the Blackstone Dunes and flanked the eastern ridge. Varkari positions crumbled before they fully understood they'd been outmaneuvered. Plasma ordnance lit up the sky in amber streaks. 2 forward command bunkers melted to slag within minutes. The humans didn't wait for orders. They disappeared. No call signs, no debate. Just motion, deliberate, silent, synchronized. A junior Varkari lieutenant named Sale watched through his scope as Redmond dove from a low ridge and buried a cluster of proximity charges into the sand. 5 seconds later, a heavy crawler surged over that same rise, then vanished in a plume of compressed air and shredded carbon steel. To the left, Mason crept through a jagged crevice in the rock face, slipping into the blind spot of an enemy scout group. Moments later, the group's forward motion stalled. The Varkari picked up faint screaming guttural, clipped, and then cut off, mid-breath. At 9:24, Sale reported to Central Command. "The Terrans are fighting." General Vosh answered bitterly, "Of course they are. They think they can win this alone." Sale hesitated, then said, "They don't seem to be thinking, they just know." The command dome filled with tension as battlefield reports turned grimmer by the hour. Colonel Jav limped into the strategy chamber with acid burns across his mid-plate. "They're folding the north line," he growled. "We lost 12 artillery drones, 600 dead, more on the way." "Where are the humans?" asked General Vosh, voice tight. "Scattered," Jav replied. "But everywhere I go where we aren't dying, I hear rumors. Sniper nests set before dawn, booby traps in escape tunnels, enemy officers killed in their own transports." He lowered his voice. "We didn't tell them any of that terrain intel." Bosch stared out the glass dome at the burning hills and clenched his fists. "They're not following orders." Jav wiped a film of blood from his lower jaw. No, sir. They're surviving. By midday, smoke clotted the sky thick enough to filter out the sun. Heat shimmered across the broken landscape. Air quality dipped below breathable thresholds for Vakari without rebreathers. The humans moved like ghosts between fire breaks. Andrews found a crashed Vakari comm tank, gutted and flickering. With just his multi-tool and a roll of fiber cabling from his pack, he patched into the enemy command net. His fingers moved with surgeon-like precision despite the tremble in his burned hands. His left forearm was blistered badly, wrapped with wet cloth torn from the sleeve of his own undersuit. Routing them south, he muttered through cracked lips. 2 battalions chasing phantoms, now. A medic tried to lead him back for treatment. Andrews shook his head. Later. If I pass out, shock me and keep the data flowing. The medic stared at him. You'll lose the arm if you wait. I've lost better. He didn't even look up from the console. Meanwhile, Baker held the western approach with just 2 Vakari riflemen and a half-assembled turret rig. When enemy infantry surged through the ruins of Outpost 18, he used a dead Vakari's weapon as bait, wiring it to a fuel cell and burying the whole thing under thermal cloaks. Then he lay prone for 18 minutes without moving, waiting. The explosion vaporized the forward line. The riflemen cheered. Baker didn't react. He was already digging the next trap, sweat pouring from his forehead into his cracked visor. I need heat rounds and 2 more charges, he said to no one in particular. If it breathes, I want it regretting it. The younger of the 2 Vakari soldiers whispered. This is how the old tales said Terrans fought. Baker glanced sideways. That's the thing about old tales, son. They always forget the smell. Cortez emerged from a rock slide carrying 4 wounded 2 Vakari, 1 human technician, and a 6-limbed assistant drone she'd reprogrammed for hauling gear. Her left leg was gone, from mid-thigh down, cauterized. Wrapped in emergency foam, blood loss was controlled but only barely. She directed fire patterns with a laser pointer while lying on a slope of loose shale. A field radio rested on her chest. Her voice was calm, detached. Redmond, you've got 30 seconds before they flank your nest. Cut east. There's a drainage shaft. Copy, came the reply. A nearby medic approached, eyes wide. You need evac now. I can carry you. No, give me the stim, move the rest first. You'll pass out in minutes. Cortez cracked the injector and drove it into her shoulder. Her pupils dilated immediately. Then you'd better make the most of them. She resumed marking targets, directing artillery coordinates through gritted teeth. Her fingers were trembling, but her voice never wavered. General Vosh watched the battlefield through a cracked holomap. Units were failing, but the gaps weren't collapsing. Somehow the lines kept reforming, drawing the enemy in, exposing weaknesses. They weren't being held by strategy. They were being held by 5 dying Terrans. In the brief pause that came at dusk, Mason returned to the forward triage post. He dropped onto a ration crate, blood crusted on his uniform, one arm hanging uselessly from a deep slash. He pulled a child's drawing from a sealed pouch in his chest plate. It was faded and creased, a crayon sketch of a sunrise and 5 stick figures. Still alive? Redmond asked, sitting beside him, sharpening a blade that was visibly chipped. Mostly, Mason replied. Cortez is bleeding out. Andrews hasn't blinked in 2 hours. Baker's making landmines out of field rations. You? She adjusted the rewrap on her foot. 2 broken ribs. The usual. We're ahead of schedule. He glanced at the drawing, then tucked it away. They think we're monsters. They'll call us something worse if we win. A Vakari scout nearby overheard. His mandibles twitched, but he said nothing. He'd seen Redmond go hand-to-hand with a burrow fiend earlier that day, using only a combat knife and her boot. The corpse still smoked 2 hills over. He no longer mocked Terrans. He now feared them. Night fell. The enemy regrouped. They brought walkers this time, 2-story mobile weapon platforms with micro-shielding and dual pulse cannons. The Vakari screamed for retreat. General Vosh prepared to evacuate command. But the humans didn't retreat. They converged. Cortez had passed out, but her final coordinate relay triggered an ambush route. Baker planted the last of his explosives beneath the broken fuel mains lining the ridge. Redmond rode a stolen glider drone directly into the walker's blind spot, leaping off at the last second to deliver a payload directly into the coolant chamber. Andrews activated every false order across the enemy rear line, convincing half their backup to shell their own forward units. Mason led the final push, arm in a sling, voice raw. Advance now. Every second they hesitate, we carve their guts out. The Barkari followed. Not out of trust, out of terror. By dawn, only smoldering wreckage remained on the western hills. And 5 humans, broken but unbent, regrouped near a collapsed tower. General Vosh arrived in a personnel carrier, the battle now quiet. He stepped down, armor polished, voice trembling. I do not understand. Earth sent only 5. Mason looked up, eyes ringed with exhaustion. You asked for help, but not your sunburner. Redmond laughed, short and bitter. You don't get the sunburner unless you fail. Bosch's mouth opened, but no sound came. Mason leaned forward and said flatly, We're the solution you get before the sunburner. Then he stood, despite the limp and the sling, and walked past Vosh without another word. The battlefield smoldered for 3 days. Scavenger drones picked through shattered wrecks and ruined command posts, dragging enemy corpses into piles while human techs filtered through scorched debris. The Varkari buried their dead by ritual flame, chanting through dinted helmets and scorched lungs. Not one human attended the ceremony. They were busy setting more traps. Word spread across the Varkari lines, quietly, in mess tents and watchtowers. The Terrans walk into artillery fields and come out covered in someone else's blood. They sleep 4 hours a week and make explosives out of rations. Most of them lost a leg and didn't stop fighting, just tied it off and kept giving orders. But the stories that stuck weren't about their tactics. It was how they looked when the fighting stopped. Not proud, not triumphant, just tired, silent, distant. Like this wasn't a victory, like it never was. They held a meeting, unofficial, unscheduled. Redmond crouched under a jagged canopy of twisted rebar, flicking through terrain maps on a cracked datapad. Baker was rewiring a Varkari drone to serve as a mobile decoy, hands trembling only slightly. Cortez, now fully conscious, was lying on her side, leg stump propped up, bandage already soaked red again. I can hold the relay net another 20 hours, Andrews muttered, adjusting his haptic glove. His forearm had swelled to nearly double its size. The skin around the burns was split in several places. You should be in triage, Mason said. I will be, after this push. They're moving something big. Redmond looked up. Bigger than walkers? Maybe. Transmissions are shielded, but I cracked their encryption keys during the last ambush. They're bringing in command-class infrastructure. High command? Mason's voice hardened. Andrews nodded. We kill that, this war breaks in half. Silence followed. Just the hum of the wounded drone and Cortez's shallow breathing. Then Mason spoke. How many Vakari units can we still move? Redmond checked her slate. Not many, less than 200 effective, maybe 30 that can shoot straight. Then we make them ghosts. 3 hours later, the humans began briefing the surviving Varkari battalion commanders. Mason stood at the front of the makeshift bunker, pointing to an improvised tactical map drawn with ash and a stick. We aren't winning by force, we're winning by control. That means terrain, comms, and chaos. Colonel Jev, still limping, crossed his arms. You mean guerrilla warfare? We mean asymmetry, Redmond snapped. You still trying to win by formation, but the enemy adapted to you weeks ago. They're afraid of you, Mason continued. Not your numbers, your unpredictability. We make it worse. He tapped the ash map. Here's where we hit, not to hold ground, but to unnerve. Cut supplies, kill their officers, scramble their signals. General Vosh was silent, watching from the corner, jaw tight. When Mason finished, he finally stepped forward. "You believe 5 of you can teach us to fight better than centuries of doctrine?" Mason didn't blink. "No, I believe we already did, when your best plans failed." Vosh said nothing. He simply turned and left. But 2 of his junior commanders remained. The counteroffensive began that night. They didn't move in platoons, they moved in 2s and 3s. Redmond led her strike team through a collapsed sewer tunnel, planting anti-armor charges beneath a supply caravan and vanishing before the enemy even knew someone had been there. Baker guided a recon squad through a collapsed mining trench, taking out sentry drones with nothing but signal feedback and a shard of polarized glass. Cortez, propped up on a salvaged hover pad, directed overlapping ambushes from a crater mouth, her voice steady despite the worsening state of her leg. The bone had begun to die, the infection was setting in. But she didn't tell anyone. She just kept drawing fire plans. Andrews had gone too far behind enemy lines. Using a captured uniform, he embedded into a logistics camp and uploaded corrupted firmware to the enemy's atmospheric scrubbers. By the time he left, the command staff couldn't breathe without coughing blood. He collapsed just past the Varkari front. A runner found him and dragged him back. When he woke, he was on a table in the field tent. Mason was there. "You almost died," Mason said flatly. Andrews groaned. "Wouldn't be the worst Tuesday. We're amputating the arm." Andrews paused. "Upper or lower?" "Shoulder." He nodded once, jaw tight. "Then give me the morphine. And hurry." The medics did it in 12 minutes. No anesthetic beyond a single injection. The stump was cauterized. The smell made one Varkari soldier retch. Andrews never screamed. He just asked, once, "Is the net still live?" It was. The final enemy push came without warning. 2 heavy dropships, orbital clearance, reinforcements in full, the last breath of the enemy. General Vosh called for an evacuation. "We are no longer tactically viable. This world is lost." But he was interrupted by a transmission. "Earth. Text only. Sunburner is not for salvage operations. If you need it, then your planet is already gone." He stared at it for a long time, then turned toward the human sector and began walking. The humans had regrouped near the dead zone. It was a stretch of craters and static zones, no signals, no scans. The perfect place to plan the last stand. Vosh found them there. He walked slowly, unarmed, alone. He stopped 5 meters from Mason, who was bandaging Redmond's side. Blood soaked the gauze, but she didn't complain. "Way, madam?" Vosh asked. Mason didn't look up. "Why what? Why are you still fighting?" Mason met his eyes. "Because someone has to." Vosh nodded. "I received Earth's response. I understand now. You are not their vengeance." "No," Mason said. "We're their hope. They only send you when there's still a chance." Mason stood, every joint aching, ribs bruised, lungs scorched. "We don't win by destroying. We win by not giving up." Then he handed Vosh a datapad. It was a schematic of a trap. Large, complex, brutal. Mason smiled grimly. "This is how we make them wish they never landed?" That night, the last battle began, and 5 humans led the charge. Cortez, mounted on a salvage drone platform, directed the assault with a laser pointer and broken teeth. She had a fever of 104 and was bleeding internally. She never stopped giving orders. Redmond flanked the command walkers with a team of 3, using smoke canisters and hacked flares to make them look like 20. She got hit in the leg, again. She kept going. Baker detonated the final explosives at the pass, collapsing an entire ridge onto the enemy's artillery convoy. His face was burned raw. He could no longer hear from his left ear. Andrew's one arm gone was carried by a drone. He plugged into the enemy net one last time and sent a false evacuation order to their command corps. They left in panic. And Mason, he was everywhere, pulling the dying from fire, holding the flank, calling strikes, bleeding from a gut wound that had gone untreated for a day and a half. He didn't stop, not until it was over. One human didn't make it. Cortez died minutes after the final push, not in battle, but under the open sky, watching the last of the enemy transports burn in the distance. She smiled once. "Tell Earth we bought him a year," she whispered. Then she was gone. 3 days later, the war ended. Not with surrender, but silence. The enemy withdrew. Vakari engineers picked through wreckage under human guidance. Debriefs were written, doctrines rewritten. General Vosh composed a private letter to Earth. "Your soldiers were not weapons, they were warnings. We understand now. Next time, if 5 Terrans land surrender. If the sun burner comes prey." The sky above Reloth 9 was gray now, not from ash or plasma storms, but from the quiet weight of aftermath. The kind of gray that settled after fires died, and people realized they were still breathing. Not victorious, not untouched, just breathing. Vakari medics moved among their wounded in solemn silence. Fires still crackled in the distance, though none spread now. The last enemy dropship had vanished into the upper atmosphere, spiraling out of orbit in flames, brought down not by missiles, but a hacked navigational ping from Andrew's one-handed coding session, relayed by a repurposed food dispenser. There were no parades, no banners, no celebration, only cleanup. And 5 humans, broken in new ways. Mason sat on a blackened ridge, hunched over a makeshift memorial, a row of dog tags, half buried in stone, the last one reading Cortez, Naomi G. His left side was swathed in blood-soaked gauze. Beneath that, a stitched-up gut wound pressed against every breath. He winced with each inhale, but never complained. Redmond crouched beside him, her foot in a rigid brace, now an awkward fit over the scars. She passed him a thermal canteen. She'd have hated a statue. She didn't get one, Mason said. She got something better. Redmond tilted her head. Which is? He nodded toward the distant ridgeline, where Vakari cadets practiced squad maneuvers, zigzagging, covering fire, dispersed formations, retreat and counterstrike drills, Terran-style tactics. Dirty, efficient, and no longer mocked. "You changed the way they survived," Mason said. "That's better than a statue." In the southern ruins, Baker knelt beside a pile of half-disassembled walker components, reconfiguring something with stripped wires and spare coolant tubes. Vakari tech scribe Thren approached carefully. "We have engineers, Terran. You need not do this." Baker didn't look up. "Your engineers didn't splice their drinking tubes into an anti-lock subroutine to save battery weight." Thren hesitated. "You people, you win with mistakes." Baker glanced at him. "We win with failure and spite." He straightened slowly, hand resting on the walker's cracked chassis. "This thing should have flattened us. It didn't. Because Cortez rerouted its AI with a field strobe and a portable fan. That's not brilliance. That's surviving because quitting costs too much." Thren said nothing, but slowly offered him a replacement capacitor. Baker nodded once. "Smart." In the triage dome, Andrews lay flat on a reinforced cot, his torso mummified in bandages, the right side of his chest exposed for easier drainage. His remaining arm was wired to a neural interface, feeding signals to a monitor that flickered with every heartbeat. He didn't talk much anymore, but he listened. A group of Vakari medics were debating whether to install dampeners on the next-gen command units, arguing over signal redundancy versus emotional logic controllers. Andrews coughed once and muttered, "Use analog fallback. Keep the logic shallow. Deep code buckles under combat stress." The medic stared. "You're awake?" "Barely," he rasped, "but smarter than your AI, so do it right." "Are you giving orders from bed?" "Yeah," Andrews whispered. Because I still have work. General Vosh visited Mason on the 4th day after the ceasefire. The humans sat in the half-collapsed remains of the old command dome, where the mockery had first begun. Now there was no laughter, only low, echoing wind. Vosh brought with him a sealed case. Mason didn't stand. He couldn't. But he looked the general straight in the eye. Vosh opened the case. His side, a star-forged medal, Varkaric highest commendation. It shimmered faintly. "We call it the writ of endurance," Vosh said. "No outsider has ever received it." Mason blinked. "You think a medal's enough?" Vosh's mandibles tensed reflex, not pride. "No. But understanding has to start somewhere." Mason reached into his pocket and pulled out the child's drawing again. He held it up between them. "She drew this before my 3rd deployment," he said. "She's 16 now. Earth said I could see her after this one." Vosh looked at the crude figures, the bright sun, the crude stick humans. "You missed everything. To help us." "No," Mason said softly. "I came because Earth doesn't send the sunburner unless we give up. And we haven't." The sunburner remained a mystery to the Varkari, a whispered horror. But now, it wasn't the humans they feared most. It was what Earth held back. In private meetings, military architects redrew defense plans around that simple policy. If Earth sends people, it means there's still a chance. If they send the sunburner, the planet's already a tomb. One Varkari admiral suggested probing Earth system defenses. He was silenced before the transmission finished. On the 6th day, Mason stood, barely, and limped to the memorial site. The others gathered there, including Andrews, carried by 2 drones. They buried a piece of Cortez's uniform beneath the stone marker. No speeches. Just a moment of silence. And then Mason spoke. "Earth doesn't raise us to win. It raises us to endure." He looked at Redmond, Baker, Andrews, what was left of them. "And when we break into blades." He didn't cry, none of them did, but something tightened in all their chests. They had survived another one, and survival, for them, was not victory. It was responsibility. 10 days after the last shot, Earth sent a follow-up message. This time encrypted, short, standard protocol. Rilot 9, secure. Proceed to evac or remain for advisory duration. Sunburner remains offline. It was all the clarity anyone needed. General Vosh met them as they prepared to leave. "You could stay," he said quietly. "Help us build what comes next." Redmond shook her head. "You don't build with broken tools." "You're not tools," Vosh replied. "You're mercy," Mason finished. "That's what we are." He looked out at the horizon, quiet now, with only the occasional hum of drones rebuilding pylons. "We come before the fire." The Varkari watched them board their shuttle, scarred and limping, moving like old machines but alive. 5 came. 4 remained. And when the hatch closed, Vosh whispered a new doctrine to his aide. "If 5 Terrans arrive, surrender. If the sunburner comes, pray." Then he turned away, the words already seared into history.